Hello, and welcome to another of our Under the Redwoods webinar series, in which we explore all things pertinent to redwoods, their history, their ecology, how they show up in the arts. You name it, we discuss it. I'm Sarah Barth, and it is my privilege to serve as the Executive Director of Sempervirens Fund and as the host of this webinar series. So thank you for joining us. We want to thank Scharf Investments. They've been a longtime supporter of this webinar series, and they are again sponsoring this edition of Under the Redwoods. We are having with us today Lisa Landers. She is a film director, and if you've been following Sempervirens, you've heard us promoting her amazing film about redwoods called Giants Rising. We've hosted a number of screenings. I believe it is coming to a streaming channel near you soon, but I'll let her share that information. But it's a beautiful, really impactful film. And Lisa has been involved in a number of other kinds of storytelling adventures for places like the National Geographic, the Smithsonian Channel, PBS and KQED, and the American Museum of Natural History, using her ability to produce images in videos and films to tell stories that matter. And so I'm delighted to have Lisa join us today and talk a little bit about her experience in directing Giants Rising. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for having me join you here today and for all of your ongoing support of the film. And thank you to everyone else for being here to hang out with us and talk about the making of Giants Rising. There may be some of you who have actually seen the film because it has been screening throughout California, as Sarah mentioned, and also just around the US for almost a year and a half now. But if you haven't, there will soon be many more ways to see it, as Sarah alluded to, and I'll tell you more about that later on. But regardless of whether or not you've seen it, the story behind the making of this tale of the Redwoods is actually a tale in and of itself. And if you, like me, are interested in the behind the scenes and the paths that people take when they're creating a film or a book or a painting, any work of art, I think what I have to say will resonate with you. And if you are redwood lovers, which I suspect most of you are, it will resonate with you all the more. So here's my plan for my little chat. I don't have slides, but I am going to talk to you a little bit about the why, the spark that inspired the documentary. And then I'm going to give you the how we did it. I'll walk you through the filmmaking journey in very broad strokes with some details about the joys and challenges from each phase of the filmmaking process, from story development to production to post-production and beyond. So let's start with the spark. Giants Rising is very much a passion project for me, one that I often say started brewing in my head when I was 12 years old. I was a kid who grew up in New York. I was on a family trip. We went to Muir Woods, and I can still remember standing there just completely astounded, feeling like I had just landed in Middle Earth. For any of you Lord of the Rings fans, like I was awestruck, clearly. I couldn't believe a place like this existed. And I think it was in that moment that I first felt the urge to share this discovery. And I'm sure I came back and told all my friends and anybody who would listen about this magical forest that I had discovered. And I'm pretty sure that the sense of wonder and curiosity that I experienced that day is what shaped my career path as someone who has always told stories about the natural world. And it definitely led me to leave my home in New York and make my home in a small redwood grove in the Bay Area, where I've been living for the past 16 years. My mother used to joke that I left New York City, the center of the universe, for a bunch of trees, which is not untrue. being in the redwoods really feels to me like my native habitat. So over the years, I worked on a few short films about redwoods, starting from very early on in my career. In 1998, I actually climbed to the top of this redwood tree where protester Julia Butterfly Hill was sitting for 2 years to protect this ancient giant from being logged. And I went up there to produce a news segment about her. Um, and talk about this sort of fight to preserve this last, one of the few last remaining old growth groves. And I also worked on a short about redwoods and climate change. And, but for all those little shorts that I worked on, and like many others that I saw, we were just telling the story of the redwoods in bits and pieces. And I felt like there wasn't anything that really wove together all the parts of the story, the science, the culture, the history, and including how the redwood stories are just deeply entwined with ours, past, present, and future. So I wanted to make a complete portrait that really connected all the dots. And also, even though I had worked on all these stories, I still had so many questions about the redwoods. Like, how do they grow so tall? How do they live so long? And then my biggest question was always, how do they work their magic on us? Why do so many of us respond this way? What's going on? So the film, in many ways, was a way for me to indulge my curiosity, um, and to basically do something that I'd been wanting to do since I was 12 years old, which was share the redwoods with people who may never actually encounter them. And for those who do know the redwoods, just give you a way to get to know them even more. So in 2018, I decided I'm going for it. So what did that mean? So this is where we get into the phases of the filmmaking journey. And the first one is story development, right? Finding and choosing the stories. And it was super important to me that this film include stories about people whose lives were deeply impacted by redwoods, or that they had dedicated their careers or their time in some significant way to the redwoods. I didn't want to make a film as if the redwoods were some untouched wilderness, right? Where only wild creatures roam. I mean, and I did talk to a few networks about doing a film like that, and they were like, great, and you can get mountain lions and bears. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it is really hard to see wildlife in the redwoods. Um, and also, that's not the story I want to tell, because I really want to explore this connection. I wanted humans represented as part of the story, part of nature, part of the redwood landscape. So, of course, this decision about how I was going to present this film meant that first and foremost, I had to start collecting stories. So, how did I do that? I just talked about this idea to everyone, friends, families, when I was at, a neighborhood barbecue, waiters at restaurants, hair salons. I mean, I was talking anyway. If you talk to me for like 10 minutes, pretty much you were going to get an earful about this idea I had to make a film that told the epic tale of the redwoods. And partly I was testing the waters, seeing if people were interested, and pretty much everyone was. But I was also collecting stories, and that was some of the ways that I found some of the best stories that are featured in the film. I also, of course, searched, news sources. I spent a lot of time on sites run by organizations like the Sempervirens Fund, and watched many of these Under the Redwood videos. So it's just great and full circle to be here talking now. As you might expect, I wound up with way too many stories, like just way too many. And I had to pick and choose. A lot of them didn't make it in, but what I really boiled it down to was that there were 5 main perspectives that seemed really important to me to include. And those were scientists uncovering the secrets of the redwoods, members of Indigenous tribes restoring cultural connections to redwoods, parks and other organizations supporting the conservation and restoration of these forests, a social psychologist to answer all of my questions about our physical and emotional response to these trees. And last but not least, an artist. I wanted someone who could use their art form to express what is kind of ineffable about these forests, that poetic rendering that sometimes the words can't just, they just don't quite get at in sort of, a more simplistic storytelling. I wanted that represented in some way. My criteria for each story that we pulled in was that they were connected, and they were connected in that they tied back to the sort of three universal themes of the film: resilience, connection, and hope. Those are the three things that I really wanted to convey in my film, along with conjuring up that sense of awe and wonder that everyone experiences when they are in a redwood grove. So I've got my stories, right? Or I think I have my stories. And then we launch into the next phase, which is production. And so, mind you, I started this in 2018. So production actually didn't happen until 2021, early 2021. So it took a while to pull all the pieces together, raise funds, because I did make this film as an independent film because I wanted to tell it the way I wanted to tell it. But when we started on production, and I would subtitle this phase "Capturing the Uncapturable." Some of you may know that John Steinbeck quote from Travels with Charlie. And actually, I just jotted it down here. I'll read you the part of it that I want to refer to. "The redwoods, once seen, leave a mark or create a vision that stays with you always. No one has ever successfully painted or photographed a redwood tree. The feeling they produce is not transferable. From them comes silence and awe." So he's right. He was right. It is really, really hard to capture a redwood on film or with any other medium. So I knew I had my work cut out for me. I knew it was going to be really, really hard to do that, to be able to conjure all of that up. But I took it as a challenge. And actually, the artist who I ended up bringing into the film, her challenge, she's a visual artist, a photographer, and her challenge was exactly that. How does she convey that visceral response that we have to redwoods through an art form? And so my personal challenge in making the film and her challenge in creating this art were really paralleling each other in terms of this tale. So how do I convey the awe and wonder and sense of connection? How do I get as close as possible to the thing that John Steinbeck said I cannot do? So I knew we needed a wide range of visuals. I knew I needed to access some of those absolutely primeval looking groves where the, ferns tower over your head and the trunks are 25 feet across. Doing this would require overcoming a long list of challenges, right? How do you convey the height of these trees and see into the canopy? Well, we used drones. How do you capture that dappled light and those moments where those rays just come through? Well, you hang out in the forest for a really, really long time. And it's often cold and wet, and the light is there for like an hour, and you got to hustle as soon as it happens. How do I create that immersive feeling? Well, we used a Steadicam, right? And so that's a camera that the cinematographer would strap to their body and kind of move through the forest, creating that feeling like you yourself are walking through. So between that and drones to get up high, and the access to some of these, truly ancient groves that are protected in parks, getting access to that was tricky because they are very well guarded by the parks. I'm happy to say. So it took me building relationships with a lot of these park managers to understand that my goals were the same as theirs, that I wanted to celebrate these trees, that I wanted to ensure their protection and do all of those things. So I spent a lot of time building relationships with people at parks. And they were a wonderful bunch of people to get to know, and those relationships continue to serve me. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So the other key way that I decided I would sort of, conjure all of this awe and wonder, and really make use of this particular format, the film format, is give people a look at something that they can't normally see. I always knew that I wanted to create animations to reveal those hidden inner workings of the trees. And I wanted it to be revelatory, but I also wanted it to have a little bit of a fantastical storybook vibe, kind of recreating that sense that I had when I was 12 and I was standing in Muir Woods and I felt like I was stepping into the pages of a fantasy novel or a fairy tale. But I also wanted it to be accurate. So I had a long list of criteria for how I wanted these animations to turn out. And it turned out it was not easy to make it, but I found a wonderful animator, a group based in Marin County called Little Fluffy Clouds, and they do beautiful magical work. Highly recommend checking them out. And then I worked with a scientist, an advisor on each of these specific elements or animation sections that I was creating. So if some of you had a chance to watch any of the clips that you received prior to this, you can also watch them later. But there is a clip where we're working with Berkeley professor Todd Dawson, and it shows how redwoods hydrate themselves, right? And we track the water coming up through the trunks, all the way out through the leaves and sort of, cycling back as part of the water cycle. And so the vibe that we were able to create took many, many, many weeks, but everybody was happy at the end. And we did that over and over again with each section. And so it was a lot of work, but it definitely felt like it paid off. The other thing I want to say about our production time is that, you go into production and you think, I know what my stories are, right? I identified them before. I talked to these people on the phone. But the best laid plans, there are always unexpected turns in the production of a documentary. It's sort of the ecstasy and the agony of making a documentary, especially one that took 6 years to complete. So I'm just going to mention two things that happened along the way, which turned the narrative in ways that I never could have anticipated. The first thing I want to mention is that right after we started production, about 6 months later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm doing fine now, but it was a hard stop for several months, or a little bit more. And I found that even though I wasn't working, because I had access to redwoods, I would go and sit out with these redwoods. And it was the only place I could really exhale, where I could really catch my breath. And I really felt like, oh my goodness, what is happening here? And so it made me do this even deeper dive into understanding how these trees work their magic on us, how they, bring down our stress levels, what is physically happening. And so, so in many ways, what happened to me ended up working its way into the film's narrative. And also just it ended up being something that I integrated into my life in other ways. And we can talk about that later if anyone's interested. The other big thing, unexpected turn that happened was that I always knew I was going to be talking about Big Basin, right? It was the first redwood park. It's the oldest California state park. And I had been filming there, working with the parks to create a film about the endangered marbled murrelet birds that nest in the tops of old redwoods and Doug firs. And so we were halfway through production on this little visitor center film, and I was supposed to go for another shoot, and so it was while I was making this other larger film, but I'm calling them, they're not calling me back. What's happening? Is the shoot, is it on, is it off? Well, this was August 2020, and the CZU fire hit. And as I'm sure most of you know, devastated the park, burned 95% of the park. And that was never intended to be part of my story. My story was about how people banded together to save this park back in the late 1800s, or to save this redwood grove and turn it into a park. But this was not part of my story. But about a month after the fire struck, I went back and with my film crew, and I actually brought the photographer from my feature film with me, because it was a place that had been really special to her, where she first kind of fell for redwoods. And we all went back there, and I just, it was kind of heartbreaking. And I knew in that moment that this story, what was happening, what had just happened to Big Basin, and what would be happening in the sort of wake of this situation, was going to be a really important, dramatic, and emotional part of my film that is very much about the story that we need to tell today about the redwoods. So that's just one example of many of these unexpected turns, and you just have to figure out how to reorient and reintegrate when those opportunities come. And now I want to jump to post-production, skipping over a lot of other parts, but post-production, is where we're doing the editing and sound design and music composition. And so I just want to talk briefly about sound design. So remember Steinbeck's challenge? How do you capture the silence? So capturing silence is not as simple as just having no sound. To understand that there's a sense of silence, or like that, when a first snow falls, there's that dampened kind of atmosphere. You have to actually hear certain sounds, but you hear them in a certain way. So I worked with some sound designers from Skywalker Sound, who support sort of lower budget films when they can, and if it's something that is of interest to them. And they all got really excited about this, and had libraries of sounds from the redwoods. And we worked together to really try to leave space for silence, but then also have certain sounds ring through, and also to amplify certain sounds that you would only hear if you were really up close. So for example, there's a scene where the photographer is running her hand over this charred redwood on the bark, and they pulled out that sound. They created the sound. They used something called Foley, which is basically I don't know, they might have been using some sandpaper or something to create that sound. But when you see this moment and you see her touching it and you hear that sound, for me, it's like an ASMR thing. My whole body just kind of tingles, and I feel like I can feel what she's feeling. And so it was really a privilege to be able to work with these people who were so excited to figure out how to handle the silence of the redwood forests and bring it to life. So that was super fun. And then the other thing I'll mention is the music. There were a lot of different ways we could have gone with the music. The composer, Cody Westheimer, is someone who spends a lot of time playing his instruments out in the wild. He just enjoys it. And so when we started talking about this film, he said, hang on, I'm going to go play in some redwood groves. Oh, okay. And he came back and he said, I think the voice of the redwood is a cello. like, yeah, yeah, I hear that. And so there's a lot of cello in the soundtrack. So anyway, that's just another fun note about, behind the scenes, about how all the different pieces of the film were brought to life. And then the last thing that I'm just going to tell you a little bit about is our social impact campaign. This film was never meant to just be a film that you watched and then you went back to, I don't know, cooking dinner. It was meant to be a film that you watched with other people, that you really felt transported, that you had a conversation afterwards, and that it prompted some kind of action. We have brought this film to 30 festivals all around the country, and even abroad. And I've gone to as many of those screenings as I can to have these incredible conversations afterwards. It's also many communities have, just set up their own screenings, and we try to attend those as well. And sometimes with people from the cast, some of the scientists or artists or folks from the parks, just to have a conversation about, how people are feeling. And there are so many different subjects in the or topics, I should say, connect people to Redwoods. And so wherever we go, people can kind of tune into whatever really speaks to them or their community. So sometimes we end up talking about Indigenous connections for, the majority of the time. Sometimes we're talking about conservation policy. There, in one that we did, it was with a high school. It was a high school foundation, and we talked about mental health. We had the wellness coordinator from this high school and talking about the value of spending time in redwood forest, or any forest for that matter. And so wherever we go and wherever we have these conversations, we always try to bring in also a local organization like Semper Virens, or like this, high school foundation, to join the conversation and see how the film or the pieces of the film make sense to them. And then by having those people sitting there with us, people in the audience have a way to take action, whatever that means for them. My main call to action with this film is very, very simple. What I want people to do after watching it is to go take a walk in the woods. Really. If more people just did that more often, I feel like, okay, my film has done its work. It doesn't have to be a redwood. I feel like redwoods are like a gateway drug to feeling that sense of awe with nature. But once you've opened up to that, I mean, you can be sitting with a little house plant and have that moment. I firmly believe that trees are just one of the greatest gateways in general to feeling that sense of groundedness and connection with nature and connection with ourselves and with each other. And, the more of us who do that, the better chance I think we will have for a brighter future. So, Sarah, I think that's about all I have to say about the film, and maybe we can start. Maybe you have some questions, or others do.
Well, this is great. If anyone in this audience hasn't watched the film, I really encourage you to do so. It is such an evocative film. Lisa, I think you really, it has a lot of impact, and listening to you talk about how you produced it, I feel like I have a little bit better understanding of how it got to be so evocative and impactful. I'm curious, you've now spent a lot of time thinking about redwoods, being in redwoods, and probably learning about them. Certainly more, I think you probably know more than I do, and I spend a lot of time thinking about redwoods, because you've looked at it now through all these different lenses. And I'm curious, A, do they still amaze you? And B, maybe share with us a little bit about what you find most remarkable, especially having now looked at them from so many different angles. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, I do know a lot about redwoods. It's funny, people are often like announcing me as,
An expert.
scientist. And yeah, and I'm like, no, 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 no.
But you may have gotten close. You play one
I
on
did.
TV.
I play one on TV, and I know, yes. But there's always more I want to know. So the answer to the first part of your question about, does it ever become old hat? No way. I'm sure you would say the same
Yeah,
thing. I
yeah,
mean, these trees just give and give and give so much to me. So 16 years that I've been here in California, I never wake up and go, it's a redwood.
right, right.
Every time I just go, wow, I live here. I get to be with these trees. And then I get to use those trees when I know, like, oh, things are spinning out of control and I need to take a moment. And I try to bring friends, family, anyone who's having a moment um, into the forest to kind of just be there and get grounded. The other question you asked was about what's the most remarkable thing. I think that I knew, but I didn't really know about how vast these clones can be.
Yeah,
Um, I know Zane was recently on talking, and I don't know if he talked about this, but right when I finished the film, so this is Zane Moore, who is a redwood geneticist, who is featured in the film. There's a little clip of him that we had posted in that email, and you can also see it online. He's just a great science communicator. He's full of energy. He's so passionate about the redwoods. And he was really instrumental, like right from the get-go. I mean, I called him up and was like, hey, you don't know me, but I want to make a film and I want you to be in it. But, okay. So that was like 2019. And he has been just involved with this film ever since then. And we finished the film and I was like, okay, it's locked. It's done, right? After all these years. And he calls me up and he's like, I got a new story. And I was like, no, no,
sequel.
no, no, we're done. I was like, all right, but lay it on me, lay it on me. And so now every time we go and talk after a screening, and if Zane's there, I have him talk about this, which is right after we did that, he and his colleagues found the largest clone ever identified. I think it had 280 trunks, covered an area of an acre and a half. And then he dated it back to when that first seed germinated, and it's like 30,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, he did
And
talk about it in his webinar, so
yeah,
folks can go back and check it out. It should be
yeah.
posted on our YouTube channel. Pretty
So that
amazing.
to me, yeah, that to me, I mean, just to be able to sense the passage of time. And now, not, you don't have to be standing under that particular tree. I mean, every time I look at the trees near where I live and just know they're all supporting each other. And I think I'm looking at one tree or a bunch of individual trees, but it's really just one all connected, entity. And there's something so poetic and remarkable about it all.
Yeah, there's a lot of analogies, I think, to human communities that you can derive from those trees in the forests. Well, you talked a little bit about how the film evolved unexpectedly due to things like your health challenge that you had. But I'm curious, you brought in all these different perspectives and voices. You mentioned Indigenous leaders and scientists and artists, and I'm curious how they informed what you did with this film, and were there some directions they took you that were really unexpected because of the new way of thinking that they brought to your efforts?
Oh, absolutely. I think the first thing that really comes to mind is really all that I learned from spending time with members from the Yurok tribe.
Yeah,
And what I thought I was going to be presenting turned out to just run much deeper and be a much bigger story. I thought, oh, I had made contact with the tribe and they were like, oh, we're carving a canoe. We haven't done this in years. And do you want to come up and film it? And I was like, sure. And so I thought, yeah, I'm just going to, see them carving this
yeah,
beautiful canoe and it's going to be beautiful. And that is in the film, by the way.
yeah, and it is
And
beautiful.
It is. It is. It's a beautiful moment. But while I was up there, they also had me talk to like four other people. One who is, more of a Rosie Claiborne, who is a tribal heritage preservation officer. So she's really looking at the totality of Yurok heritage, and in many ways how that's tied to redwoods. And so we talked about that in the sort of larger context of, the fact that the parks that are up there, those most beloved parks, they're Redwood National Park and all the connected state parks. That was all land that was belonged to the Yurok or to the Tolowa tribe, to all of these
It
other
wasn't
tribes.
empty land waiting to be made a park.
Right. And it was like I knew that, but I never really
Yeah,
thought about it. And so that what happened, that horrible disconnection that was created, and then this beautiful initiative to reconnect the cultures of the indigenous communities there and bring all of that knowledge that they have about really how to steward these forests in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't look at us as separate from nature,
yeah,
which is my problem with so many nature documentaries. Like everything's like, oh, and here are the animals and here we are. No.
yeah.
So through talking to them, and I ended up with like four people from the Yurok tribe speaking in the film. I thought I was going to have one. I had someone from the Fire Council. I had someone who's the director of fisheries talking about the salmon and the interconnections. You alluded to
Yeah,
that before.
yeah,
Though their stories completely changed the shape of the film
yeah,
from what I imagined it would be when I started.
yeah. And I would say in my work, I've had very analogous experiences with tribal perspectives, really changing the way I think about humans' place on the land and a whole variety of things. So I'm not surprised to hear that, but thank you for sharing that. Um, well, you alluded to this, or you said it explicitly, that you wanted to have this film be a call to action. I think it is. And you've ended up, as a result, working with Semper Virens Fund and many other partner organizations um, who are focused on advocacy, or either in the public policy arena, or are out there trying to protect land, restore redwood forests. And I'm just curious what that experience has been like, how that's changed your own thinking or understanding of what it takes to preserve land.
Yeah, it became very clear to me through building these relationships and connections with groups like Semper Virens and so many others how important it is to get involved on a more local level for
Yeah,
people. I mean, if we look at the news, it's just overwhelming. I want to run and hide in my closet. But then when I get with groups, whether it's Sempervirens or like the local Firewise community,
yeah,
that's just trying to reorient people towards fire, make them feel okay about prescribed burns, but also be safe. And, each of these pieces is so important. And collectively, I feel like is the only way, we're going to get it right.
right.
Is if, how important and also how many avenues there are available to people. So every time I'm going to set up a film screening, I'm like, okay, who should we get, what land trust should we get, and we just have so many options of
Yeah,
different voices and community and groups that can come together and provide a way for people to get involved and take ownership and bit by bit make those changes that we need to make.
yeah. Well, I'm curious, you profiled in the film an artist, woman artist. We recently had on actually, I think it was our last webinar was with Jane Kim, the science illustrator, who's amazing and was Semper Virens' first forest fellow. I think for many people, the connection between scientists and even probably nowadays, certainly in this audience, the connection to Indigenous leaders is pretty obvious, but it may be less obvious to people why it's important to get folks from the arts involved. And you're obviously working in the arts. Film is an artistic medium. But I wondered if you could say more about your decision to choose to highlight, of the many things you could highlight, why you chose that as one of the five primary, themes or people that you highlighted, and why you felt like that was important as part of the story about redwoods.
And we're talking about the artist, right? We're talking about Sarah, yeah. So Sarah Bird is a photographer, and this was a connection that came to me through my, just talking about it to everyone. I happened to mention it to a friend of mine, that I had this crazy idea, and he said, "Well, you must meet Sarah Bird. She has a crazy idea about redwoods too."
Right. It's an amazing idea.
And the idea, for those of you, I'm not giving too much away because you learn it pretty quickly at the start of the film, is that her photography, she's been taking photos of trees, not just redwoods, lots of trees, for like 30 years now. And she tries to create these monumental portraits. And by monumental, I mean like the scale is 1 to 1. Like, so if you're going to do a redwood and you want to hang it in your house, you're going to get like just a piece of the trunk. And the reason she does it that way is because the scale is so important in our experience of the redwoods. I mean, you can look, I used to have like an Ansel Adams where, you can see the redwood and it's great, but it doesn't have that like, oh my gosh, wait, I'm suddenly having this visceral response to my scale versus the scale of the trees.
Yeah.
And so she really wanted to use her art to convey that. And I loved that. That to me is getting at the thing that I mentioned earlier of this sort of ineffable, like I can talk about it.
Yeah.
But what she's trying to do is, so she wanted to make a life-size portrait of a 310-foot redwood. She was searching and searching and searching for a tree, and she actually connected with Zane Moore, the redwood geneticist, who also, as a hobby, measures the heights of trees.
Yeah.
He's been doing this since he was like 16.
He's
I
a
think.
great resource for finding the tallest trees in the region.
Yeah. So I have all of this behind the scenes footage where the two of them are out there, like climbing around, trying to figure out how tall old tree is and, measuring it and triangulating. And yeah. And anyway, and they did it. But that you have to watch the film to see how it unfolds. But yeah, I loved that story of how people try to find ways to convey the redwoods, yeah, in different ways, in ways that just hit you in the heart in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and I've said for a long time, and it's true at Sempervirens, from the very get-go, artists have been essential to the organization's existence and its ability to do its work, because it's a way of creating that sense of awe that you also talk about in the film, that I think is part of why redwoods are so powerful. Well, a couple more questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, questions we've gotten from the audience. One is, what's next for you, and what's next for the film?
So thank you for asking that question, because I always forget to mention it. I get so wrapped up in what I'm talking about. So the film is going to be much more accessible soon. We will continue doing screenings. You can host a screening if your community wants to, or independent theater, so forth. But it will be premiering on PBS November 1st. It'll be streaming, pbs.org, streaming everywhere. And then if you check local broadcasts, you can also catch it that way. KQED, I believe it's the night before Thanksgiving, so we get to have some gratitude.
That's
warm up
awesome.
with the redwoods. Yep. So all of that is on our site, giantsrising.com. We're going to start posting all of that. You can find out about screenings. You can reach out to us about screenings. You can also host screenings through our educational partner, Good Docs. And they are now getting the film into schools and with discussion guides and libraries. And yeah, so, and it's already out there internationally. If you have friends in Europe, it's all over. It's streaming there too, which is super.
Congratulations.
So that's great. And so what's next for me? Well, we're still in the thick of it. I mean, it's a journey that keeps on going, because we're sort of delivering all these new versions. We have a feature length version, but we made a shorter version for PBS and for education. And Then we make shorter versions for other educational clips. So it just keeps going. But I am also working on, because of my friendships that I've made with the parks, they have brought me on to do some more projects for them, which is wonderful. And I'm currently working on a film for the Año Nuevo Visitor Center all about elephant seals.
Well, that's also in our region.
I
Fantastic.
know, I
That's
know.
that's very exciting. Well,
Yeah,
maybe we can have you back and talk about elephant seals.
sure.
I'm sure there's a nexus somehow. I'm sure we can make a nexus to Redwood.
Oh, we filmed in the Redwoods in the Curoste Valley, which is all part of Año Nuevo Preserve.
There
Oh
you
yeah,
go.
it's all connected.
We're good. Okay, great. Well, I was going to ask you more, but I think I want to leave time for our audience to ask questions. So Matt, I'm going to call you onto the screen and see if you have questions from the audience. Actually,
Happy to
while
be
Matt's
here.
figuring
Yeah.
that out, I did see a question in the chat that I will take the prerogative or to ask, which is, are there any stories that got left on the cutting room floor that you want to share with us now?
Oh, so many, so
Somebody
many.
in the chat or Q&A asked that.
Yeah, so many. This is the one I'll talk about, and we actually have a clip that I'm going to release because it kind of came out in the 11th hour. I tried so hard to keep it in. So two of the scientists that we feature, Steve Sillett and Marie Antoine, they are at Humboldt Polytechnic, and they are really the pioneers of sort of understanding the redwood diversity, the redwood canopy, climate change. So they show up in our film, but there are so many interesting things that they've done over the years. And one of the things that they are doing right now is they're working with an active kind of timber area with the Pacific Forest Trust. And they are trying to figure out how to have this place where they're still, actively logging, but to create, a more sustainable landscape by leaving some of those giant trees, right?
Yeah.
And not only are they leaving the giant trees, but they're trying to jumpstart them on their path to becoming those big old giants that do most of the work in these forests, right?
Yeah.
They capture so much carbon, and they host so many animals and plants. So to do this, they did a fern transplant where they took some ferns from Prairie Creek with a permit, and they climbed up this tree, and then they put the ferns in like you would plant seeds in your garden to just jumpstart that process, because the ferns are really the sort of ecosystem engineers in the canopies. And so we filmed this whole scene, and we climbed up, and my sound guy climbed up and nearly fell out. I mean, the whole, it was a lot. And then that whole scene just felt like a step too much. So I'm just going to have to turn it into another short film. But that
maybe
was one
we'll have Steve Sillett come and do a talk for us.
Yeah.
He's done projects with us in the past, and maybe we can play your clip. That's
Absolutely.
great. All right. Well, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And that was definitely my first question. So thank you for asking it. We got a question about whether you'd been back to Big Basin recently, and I thought it might be interesting to ask you that to kind of get a sense, since you spent so much time there filming before and after the fire, and get your impressions on what you're seeing at Big Basin as it's recovering from wildfire and returning to a new normal.
So I haven't been back in a few years. I went back about a year and a half after, and we did some filming then, and it was beautiful to see how resilient, this forest is. It was beautiful to see all the signs of new growth, all the redwoods sprouting, and other plants coming back, and but it's different, right? This is a park I've been going to since I was in my early 20s, and it felt different, and I felt myself having to reorient like around its beauty. And I haven't been back in a few years, but it was, it is now sort of taken on a new kind of beauty in its ability to regenerate after this. And I think it's important to learn how to see the beauty in those kinds of things. So I feel like it shifts our framing in a way that we're really going to need to be shifted, I think, going forward as things like this happen, and to not just feel kind of wiped out when that happens, but in some ways energized to help steward things in new directions and in different directions that may be better for the health of the forest in the future. And that's something that Susan Blake, who is the park interpreter who worked at Big Basin, who's featured in the film, talks about. She says, we have a chance to reimagine Big Basin in a way that really serves it better than we were doing before. And I know that Superpowers, you guys are really involved with that reimagining of Big Basin. And I think the more people who get involved with it, the better, and take ownership in sort of nurturing this park back to where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that journey with us. Yeah. You talked at the beginning of your talk about some of the inquiries you were getting from potential production companies that asked you to follow along with wildlife and things like that. And wildlife is maybe something you weren't able to really bring into the film in a full way. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether there were opportunities that you couldn't take to talk more about the wildlife and its relationship to the redwoods. It comes up in some places. And I know you did some filming around marbled murrelets and other things. How are you thinking about wildlife in the making of the film?
So that's a great question, because when the film was, 3 hours long in my first cut, there was a section about marbled murrelets. There was a section about northern spotted owls. There was, we had some bears. I mean, there was everything in there. And turns out you can't just pack it all in. I wanted to. I didn't have the time and resources to spend days on days and days, out there waiting for that, Pacific fisher or, other sort of elusive creatures to emerge. I wish I did, but I wouldn't be able to tell their stories completely. It really is a separate film. And maybe that is the next film I'm going to make, because the wildlife in the redwoods is wonderful and so elusive. It's so hard to see. And that's what really, I knew that, oh gosh, it's going to take me a long time to make this, and it's not possible. But we did collect a lot of stories, and I did make the decision to take out the marbled murrelet and spotted owl. I mean, they make their appearances, so who some of the inhabitants of this place is. We did spend a lot of time with some banana slugs, but the salmon story is the one story that stayed in, because the salmon story tied to all of those themes that, as I mentioned, were so important to me about, connection and resilience and hope. And it was also the director of the fisheries from the Yurok tribe who is talking to us also about the cultural ties to the salmon, and, the way the salmon feed the redwoods and the redwoods support the salmon. And so I decided that if I was going to do one story about an animal, which is pretty much all I could fit in with all the other stories I was including, that was my wildlife story.
It was a great choice. And I do think people don't fully understand that linkage between salmon and redwood forests, but it is tight. And I thought the film did an amazing job explaining that. Well, I'm mindful that we're out of time, but I want to thank you, Lisa. We could spend a lot more time talking to you. I hope we will continue to do more activities with you and talk to you. And we're going to talk to you very shortly at our Under the Redwoods webinar live. So thank you to our audience for joining us. We do encourage you to join us in person, October 8th. And if not, to look for the recast on our website. Thank you again. And that is our webinar for October 8th. We will not be having another webinar. Yeah, to hear what Lisa and Dr. Ayanna Johnson have to say about redwoods in the context of climate resilience, and how we can think about things in a more hopeful way. So thank you. Thank you also again to Shark Investment for underwriting this webinar series. So thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. See you under the redwoods.
See you under the redwoods. Thanks.